I be one of the people in Manchester screaming Judas when he plugs in his electric guitar? What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Taste Like Music. I'm your host, Joe Steigerwald. This is my co-host, Dylan Sevey. And this is, well, actually, I don't know what this is called because we've never established a name. I did come up with some possibilities. Maybe I'll just throw some out. You can tell me what you think. Uh, Double Dylan Discovery, A Tale of Two Dylans, 40 Shades of Dylan, Great Dylan Spectations, What About Bob Dylan, and Bobbing for Dylans is what I came up with. Not sure which of those kind of is the catchiest, has the best ring to it. Jason suggested Joe Gets Schooled, was his suggestion for this. I think he's trying to belittle me a little bit. We'll come up with a name. People will see it on the title screen and on the YouTube page. Anyway, it's about learning to appreciate Bob Dylan, which I have not done enough in my life. If you missed episode 1, basically we talked about our Dylan experiences, our opinion on Dylan, and got into, a little bit prepping for the debut Bob Dylan album, 1962's Self-Titled. That was very helpful for me because I listened to it. That was the whole point. Listen to the debut Bob Dylan, and I got some thoughts. I feel like you should speak somehow before I delve into this giant spiel I have on the first Bob Dylan. So I don't tell me what you've been doing in the past week, and what you think I think of the first Bob Dylan.
Well, I clearly haven't been putting enough time into thinking about potential titles for you, because that's a hell of a list. I think that Double Dylan Discovery potentially opens up the door for some unintended double entendres. Like, in what ways are you trying to explore me? Do our wives need to talk about that? I mean, there's a lot maybe happening there. As a big Bill Murray and Richard Dreyfuss fan, I do like the What About Bob reference, but I trust that in the next 12 hours you'll think of something good. But I have been thinking about it, and I listened to this album again. All of these records I've heard, I don't even know how many times. This album I've probably heard at least 50 to 60 times in my life. But I listened to it again over this last week after we talked. I really like this album, and I'll give my thoughts on it after you give yours. But I did try to think, and I ended up convincing myself, and I don't know if it's pure 100% wishful thinking or not, but I convinced myself over the course of the week that you were really gonna like this album. At the very least, I convinced myself that you were going to appreciate it, that you were going to hear some things that you weren't expecting, that you had never heard out of Dylan before, that you were going to keep in mind sort of what we talked about, he's not just a songwriter, he's a singer, he's a performer, he's an interpreter, he's a musician, he's all these things. So I'm fascinated to find out if I'm right or not. And, I can't tell based off that look on your face. I feel like maybe I'm in for some disappointment here.
All right, I can't hold it in anymore. So back in episode 1, you were telling me, get ready for, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but almost a folk punk kind of Bob Dylan. And I didn't believe you, but I do now, because I don't want to say I was blown away by this album, because it is 1962, and this is never going to be my preferred style of music, because it's just a little too guitar, singer, harmonica flavor. Like, I want that full band experience usually, but I totally get where you were coming from, and I totally don't understand why people dismiss this album, because it's like a whole side of Bob Dylan I didn't know existed. And that actually might be a bad thing for the rest of the catalog, because I don't know if I'm ever going to get this again. But you were totally right about like the folk punk of it. Like he is doing things I never expected Bob Dylan to do. Like his vocal style, the speed of the guitar, like that freight train kind of jangle that he's doing. I I didn't think he had it in him, and it's like dispelled all of these ideas that I've had about Bob Dylan, where I kind of thought he was a bit of a wet noodle, I guess. Like I just didn't realize he had this in his repertoire. And he actually sounds cool. And I never thought like I always kind of think Bob Dylan is sort of, uncool. And I know people love him and whatever. He's a great songwriter and all this stuff. Brilliant, whatever. I just never thought he sounded cool until this record. And maybe I need to listen to more 1962 folk. And maybe everyone was doing punk, folk punk in 1962, but I doubt it. Like this seems like he's already sort of going off on his own thing and breaking through the conventions of the genre. Even if it's not his songs, he's still making these, Jesse Fuller and Curtis Jones and Eric von Schmidt and Dave Ronk and all these classic folk songs. He's really making his own. And it just kind of blew my mind a little bit. It didn't like change the way I think about music because it's still, just a guy and his guitar, but he's almost manic. The vocals on You're No Good, like he's doing that laugh and those howls. And does he do that elsewhere? Like, spoiler alert, because I've never heard him do anything like that before.
Yeah. Well, I'm so pleased on so many levels right now. I fail to understand how you could not think that this guy is the coolest motherfucker in the world, after listening to, Bringing It All Back Home and Highway 61, blah blah blah. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. This is a different kind of cool, and I understand exactly what you're saying. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I've heard every folk record that came out in 1962 or every folk record that came out before this, but I have heard quite a bit. And the thing about Dylan is that he takes so much from so many different places. In addition to obviously being such a great student of folk music, he was also listening to Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and Sonny Terry and all these other blues singers, and you can hear that in sort of that growl, that growly delivery of his. And he also was a rock and roll kid. I mean, he saw Buddy Holly, when he came to, I think, Minneapolis, when he was a teenager. I think in his high school yearbook, he said that his dream was to be the pianist in Little Richard's band. So he's coming at this material with kind of a rock and roll energy and with these blues leanings, and then the huge folk vocabulary and appreciation. And yeah, I want to say he's not reinventing the wheel yet, but everything that I've heard, I mean, everything that I've heard, there's nothing quite like this. You might be able to find, people who were singing kind of like this, but it's not even just the sound of his voice. It is his delivery. It's the combination between his guitar playing is frenetic. I mean, it's so, he sounds like a man possessed on half of this record. I know that I name checked Fixin' to Dyin' In My Time of Dying as two of my favorites. But even songs like Gospel Plow and Highway 51, Freight Train Blues. I think it's incredible. I think it's absolutely remarkable. And then even on songs like, House of the Rising Sun, I think the way that he builds up the tension in each verse of that song shows how much of an understanding that he already has for, setting a mood, telling a story. I think it's unbelievable. He recorded this when he was 20 years old. To have such a clear understanding of this material at 20 years old is so so unbelievable. And I don't know about you, my favorite song is one of the two originals, "Song to Woody," obviously written for Woody Guthrie, for a few reasons, because I think it's fascinating to hear him so reflective and indebted to his heroes, because he also name checks Leadbelly and Sonny Terry and Cisco Houston. And it's not on the same level of the Panic compositions that we're going to hear from him next year, but yeah, that last verse, "I'm leaving tomorrow, but I could leave today, somewhere down the road someday." The very last thing that I'd want to do is to say I've been hitting some hard traveling too. Basically, outright admitting, like, look, I admire you, and I know that I can take what I've learned from you and really do something with it, but I'm still hesitant. I've seen the struggles that you've been through, and I don't know if I'm truly prepared for that. And knowing the cultural heights and importance that he's going to reach, I think that's so prescient. So I think this whole album is fascinating. And yeah, I know that right now you're not personally worrying about ranking them or rating them right now, but for me, this is a solid 3.5 star record to me. I think it's so engaging and entertaining, and not even necessarily just as like a curio, like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I think it's legitimately very, very good.
I mean, your 3.5, probably my 4. And I mean, to me, this is clearly a 4 star, which is sort of my level of, would I listen to it again without being prompted by some TLM thing? And I definitely would. And this album really dispelled some of the myths that I had built in my own head about Dylan, that he wasn't, that interesting of a singer, that he wasn't dynamic, that sometimes he lacked, passion and energy for a song. And spoiler alert, I know what he sounds like on Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, and I never would have expected him to sound like this before. I mean, on Freewheelin', he's almost like he's very cool and calm and like studious and like this very mature folk singer who's just worried about, these incredible lyrics and sort of stringing together poetry almost. To me, knowing what's coming next, he almost loses some of the passion that he had here and that energy, that punk ideology of, I'm just going to do things my way. I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to just sort of put my all into it. I just never would have expected him, like, knowing what comes next in all his later albums. I never expected him to have this in his repertoire, especially vocally. When he holds the Freight Train Blues, like he's holding blues for like 15 seconds. Like that is more creativity I think I've seen or heard from his vocals than any other song I can think of. And not like, again, I don't think he's a bad vocalist, but he has this sort of almost monotone delivery that he gets into when he's doing more of the bluesy stuff later, that he's really kind of varying it up here and using different like cadences and trying, maybe it's just trying new things and getting into like that Muddy Waters and that Little Richard and his heroes, and channeling that into these folk songs that make it so interesting to me. 1,000% not what I expected at all. If you hadn't warned me about the folk punk, I don't even know what I would be doing. Like my mind probably would have been completely blown. So I was a little ready for it. I was ready for something that I wasn't ready for. So that was good. Thank you for doing that. And unfortunately, this leaves me in a situation where, will I like this too much and like his vocal stylings and his energy and that up-tempo guitar, that the freight train guitar chug that he's doing here, is that going to take away from my appreciation of him later? Do I have to now like shift my mindset into, here comes the singer-songwriter Bob Dylan, the folk punk Bob Dylan is dead and gone forever?
Well, two things. Firstly, let's put a positive spin on this. The entire the entire concept of this entire show is to see, how slash if your appreciation for and enjoyment of Bob Dylan grows. We are one album down and it has already grown.
One for one.
One for one. So regardless, and even if you hate the next 39 records, which you won't, we know for a fact that you do enjoy some of them coming up. But even if you did, you have already discovered something new. And I can assure you that that is not gone from him. But I think what you do need to adjust is how you expect to hear it from him. Because they're going to be, you're just going to hear it come out of him in different ways. This is a ways down the road. He did 2 albums in the early 90s, just acoustic albums of folk originals, kind of his like back to basics. He just had a long stretch of kind of critical and commercial falling out of grace, and he needs to regroup a little bit. He does the thing that so many artists do, like let's go back to basics, the things we know. And it's not exactly like this because like I said, not to backtrack on what I just said, because I said it's amazing to hear the understanding he has of this material, and he has an understanding of it in the way that I think any 20-year-old student has of something. But what he doesn't have, that he eventually has when he does these albums in the 90s, is a life's worth of living experience. Spoiler alert, I do like those 2 records a lot. And the reason I like them is because for whatever I like about this album in terms of its energy and all that, I like those albums because I feel like I'm listening to somebody like really connect more so on an emotional level, where I think this is more of a connection on an energetic level. So it's not gone at all, I don't think. I just think you're going to notice it come out more in different ways. And I guess, to segue into the next record, you've heard Freewheelin' multiple times, including very recently when you guys did the 1963 deep dive. So you know what to expect for the most part. But this time, especially, when you're listening to the cream of the crop on that record, I'm interested to see how you feel now that you've heard this debut album, knowing that Freewheelin' was released just 1 year later, and considering how far he's come from interpreting other people's songs to writing his own and the lyrical content of those original songs compared to these ones, which, not a knock on any of these songs. I don't think any of them are poorly written or underwritten. I think they're all exactly what they're supposed to be. But, again, understanding the full effect of his writing and the impact of what he did, by considering that contrast, I think is really fascinating.
Well, it's definitely a good point. Just a year later, he definitely feels like I don't know, want to say like different artist, but when he's interpreting these when he's interpreting these folk songs on the first album, he doesn't have that earned maturity and world weariness. I don't want to say he's like faking it, but I think he does a very good job of like taking on the weight of the world when he's running through In My Time of Dying, which a 20-year-old or whatever singing In My Time of Dying sort of goes against the whole point of a song like that. It's very world weary blues, and he's just sort of this punk kid running through these classic folk songs, which I think is cool. It gives it a whole different feel and take on things. And I think him speeding them up and making them different than a traditional folk version of these was really smart. I think that is exactly what he had to do to make them his own. And I think he does a very good job and everything. The only song I'm a little iffy on is House of the Rising Sun. And maybe that's just because I'm used to the gravitas of the Animals version. And the Dylan one, it's 5 minutes long. And I do love the way he goes 2, 3 minutes on all these songs, because sometimes I feel like maybe could cut a verse or two, but here he's just, hammering through. And I think there's definitely hints and roots of great songwriting. I don't know if Talking New York or Song to Woody, you could talk about them as a great piece of songwriting. They're not something you'd expect from a 20-year-old. They have some of that like double meaning. And in Talking New York, he's already, I think, ragging on the industry pretty good for a 20-year-old. It sounds like, a 30-year-old talking um, about working for $1 a day and sort of cutting people down and using his wit. It reminds me a little bit of, Steely Dan. I hate to use Steely Dan, always Donald Fagen.
I mean, cunning and cutting are the two words that
I mean,
come to my mind first.
it's already that acidic sort of, cut you down at your knees, that you don't even realize that I'm, cutting you down sort of level of lyricism that, we come to expect from Bob Dylan. And it's not at the level of Positively 4th Street or anything, but you can tell that there's something there, something, beyond what the normal 20-year-old folk singer has. And you really see it a year later. I mean, he makes giant leaps into Freewheelin' Bob Dylan and Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. And he's using, metaphors and complex phrases and double meanings all over the place. And it's just like, where'd this come from? But you can definitely see it. And I definitely see why, or I definitely don't see why people dismiss this album and just sort of skip over it, because it's laying the foundation, I think, for everything that he does and showing off things that I never knew he did.
It's just one of those things, people get in their heads who an artist is, or what an artist is supposed to be. And with Dylan, it's repeated ad nauseum. Like, he's the greatest songwriter ever. So yeah, what use would anyone have for an album where he wrote 2 songs? Where he's just doing, like, why would I need to listen to him sing In My Time of Dying where I can hear Zeppelin do it? Why would I listen to him sing House that Rises the Sun I can hear the Animals do it? But as so often is the case, it's like, he literally has, his most recent album of all original material, Rough and Rowdy Ways, starts off with a song, I Contain Multitudes, as he always has. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's extremely, extremely unfair to dismiss this record. I'm so, so pleased, not just that you enjoyed it, but that, like we said, it's already kind of giving you that extra level of appreciation, that you're already discovering some things that you didn't know. And in addition to what I said about, going into Freewheelin' and thinking about it, or you don't even really have to think about it. You're just going to, I think, naturally now have more context going into it from this record. But even just some specific examples, even if he's not consistently, getting into that Highway 51 or that gospel plow, sort of thing, listen to how he approaches a song like Masters of War. Listen to how he approaches even a song, kind of a throwaway, Honey, Just Allow Me One More Chance. Even just listen to that, you still hear where his roots lie, and you hear how, especially in a song like Masters of War, where he's flexing all of these newfound muscles that he's got, but he's still holding on. He still, I think, very much understands what he needs to get across as a performer and not just as a songwriter.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna have to listen to Freewheelin' now with whole new ears. And I hate to go back to the cover again, but if he looked a little cooler on the cover, I don't think I would have I was expecting, bring out the cover again. Let's see it.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
got my whole box set here.
I was expecting like a Peter, Paul, and Mary, like polite kind of
Mm.
folk. Like that guy doesn't look, he doesn't look punk. He doesn't look like he's capable of producing the songs and the singing that I just heard on that album. So I
Yeah, he's traded out that coat for this one. I
he
don't
looks
know.
like a badass on that Freewheelin' Bob Dylan cover. Like
He
he fixed
does.
his image real quick.
Yeah, we're not quite at leather jacket yet, but we've gotten rid of some of the whatever you call this right here.
Mhm,
I'm not,
mhm.
I'm not a fashionista. Somebody in the comments can tell me what it
Mhm.
is. Well, man, I'm really, really happy to hear that you had such a good experience with this first one.
I'm very excited. I'm going into this now, brand new ears, like I said. And I just hope I don't have the opposite effect of what people are expecting out of this experiment, where I'm pining for that Bob Dylan from 1962, that fast guitar playing, wild harmonica madman. Would I be one of the people in Manchester screaming Judas when he plugs in his electric guitar? I don't know. We'll see. That is why we're doing this. I don't expect to be one of those people, but you never know. It's interesting. It's opened my ears, opened my eyes to Bob Dylan in 1962. And next episode we'll be looking at Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, a record I'm pretty familiar with. Um, I like it. I had it top 10 in 1963. I had a couple songs on my top 25 songs list. Big fan of Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. Big fan of Masters of War. Whatever else is
Hard
on
rain.
Hard Rain Gonna Fall. And we'll see how I like the other songs. There was a couple in there that I thought maybe could have been jettisoned, and it'll be interesting to hear it now. Some of the bluesier numbers, if I'm pining for that faster guitar of the debut. So
I'll send you a couple of freewheeling outtakes that didn't make the cut that I think you'll really enjoy. I'm willing to bet there's two or three songs that you're gonna, and this is a conversation that we'll have with almost every single album. It's the curse of the Dylan fan is having access to all of these outtakes, and almost every single record you go, wait, why did he leave off this song and why did he put on this one? But that's for when you get further into your burgeoning fandom.
well, when you're a songwriter at his level, you can have maybe there's some, label interference. Who knows? He's just putting out great songs left and right. This is around when he was producing all these songs that the Birds would cover later, like his My Back Pages, stuff like that. Or is that a
That's a
little
little
later?
later. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that'll be episode 3. I hope you enjoyed episode 2. I hope everyone listened to Bob Dylan 1962 along with me and discovered something new and exciting that maybe you overlooked about Mr. Dylan. I know I did. Leave your comments in the comment section, like the video, subscribe, check us out on social, check Dylan out on social, whatever you're on. Who knows anymore now that Elon Musk has ruined Twitter. They'll find you somewhere. Yeah, on X. Gonna give it to you. So, as always, thank you, Dylan, for going on this journey of discovering Dylan with Dylan. And hope you'll tune in next time here on Taste Like Music.